My name is Ciarán Walsh. I'm an artist originally from Ireland and now living in Berlin. I have a sculpture practice, but I'm also one of the co-curators and founders of the Reading Room project.
And I am Dominique Hurth. I'm a French artist based in Berlin for the past 7 years, working in different medias, including publication.
The Reading Room started as a concept that we've been playing with since about 2009. We both, as artists and as appreciators of art, had a large interest in the publication and how it could function as an artwork, and not just as something to document a pre-made exhibition. In early 2010, we started to properly develop the project, and it opened in June of 2010. We started off with approximately 50 publications, which we collected via donation from mailing people requesting directly publications from people, from having an open call, and from several publications that we had in our own private collections of art books. The project actually started in our own apartment. We put aside a room of our apartment for the Reading Room, and this has the publications, a reading desk, an area. Guests would book appointments with us, come to us on Saturdays or Sundays for their own time, and then we'd have a small, social interaction. It's like a domestic social interaction. We'd make them a tea or a drink, and then they would usually stay for about 45 minutes to an hour and a half in this reading room that we had created on their own, spending time with the publications.
Our idea was actually pretty simple when we started to think about it. It was actually in response to where would we actually find publication of books made by artists, and usually there is only one place, or let's say two places. The first is a bookshop and the second is a gallery, and based on those two locations, basically we got interested in what could actually be another context for publication to exist and give space to them, in regards to the fact that in a bookshop you may not necessarily spend time with the books, you actually browse through them. It's more in a consumerism manner that you actually look at them and you may buy them or not. So you may actually take a decision based on a reading that is very fast, so it's maybe a couple of seconds, a couple of minutes, and so this was actually the reason why we decided as well to offer a space that is pretty intimate and that is private, where individuals come to spend time on their own with the books that we've selected. After, I think it stays in our apartment for about 6 months, if I'm right. And in February 2011, it moved to a place that is called Ciarán, which is actually a collective of studio. It's about 50 studio in a building that is pretty interesting because it's right where the wall used to be, right on the river. So it's a big factory building with lots of speculation around, and it's been really a place for production. And the board of this place changed a couple of years ago, and they really tried to think about production in a more general sense. What is actually art? What does actually artists do? What kind of production is it? So they invited us to relocate our reading room in one of the space there, and we decided basically to also include a series of talks inviting artists that were working with the media of the publication or the book or the reading and so on, and we organized monthly events. It
was a very important aspect for us, as always, as well as, well, I guess there's three aspects to the reading room. We want to provide a physical space in the manner that we discussed. We want to somehow also promote the artists that are involved. There's a kind of a curatorial promotional aspect to that. But also it's thinking about how to activate the books, how to find other ways to communicate them, or how they work in a kind of a social context. So we started to organise events in Ciarán on a monthly basis. 3 of these involved us inviting artists to come and not do a straight artist talk or lecture, but somehow represent their publication-based artwork or the publication-based practice in a performative lecture context. We had the first one was Steinwerhoff, the second was Carl Larsen, who's both a poet and a sculptor, and the third was Atlin Lenger, who does practice is largely based upon doing kind of performance lectures, mediating the performative print of text with the spoken word and research, and using these as interaction between research and the audience. And our final event was an event concentrating on audio materials for the reading room, and this aspect of audio publishing and how that's linked to print publishing, and how they both represent really our practice, which is a kind of a relatively small scale definable object that is usually enjoyed on a one-to-one basis by the artist, and connecting the artist and the audience member, not in a gallery space, but usually something that is purchased and brought home, or brought to the audience member's own studio if they're an artist, or in small interactions in spaces like this at reading tables, listening posts.
But actually, even before the four events at Flughafen, we had two evenings, or one evening and one afternoon, that were already outside our private space. The first one was in a very beautiful social realist building from the late 60s in Berlin, where we invited two artists to reflect on one aspect of the publication, which is the speech and language and translation. And the two of them actually are not, the two artists we invited, Jacques Fischer was actually a designer, and Cécile Belmont is a French artist, are not working primarily with publication. And actually the events were more generally not just about the publication or how to actually activate them, but also really reflect on the fact that publication is a total part of an artist's practice, and that it's not just something that comes after the work, or that comes before the work, or that kind of surrounds the work as a way of communication or advertisement, but actually it's something that is totally inherent to a practice, as much as a performance could be, or as much as a talk could be. And so this is also another aspect of the events. The second public afternoon that we had was actually going back to a location where we originally thought this is not the right place for publication, or where we thought actually it's a tricky place for publication, which is a gallery space. It's an artist-run space, but it actually works very much as a gallery, and there is a concept of Produzentengalerie. This is a German idea of artists setting up their own gallery, where they actually pay monthly for a space, and but work commercially as a gallery as well. They really want to sell, they really want to get into that. And they invited us to create a small reading room together with another publisher, Textem Verlag, who is based in Hamburg. And this was a pretty interesting aspect that also kind of raised lots of questions, such as what happens when you put books in a gallery space? In terms of display of aesthetics, what is actually the expectation as well of a gallery visitor when they enter a space and they actually see books, and those books are not for sale. And
I think this was the first instance, and probably maybe one way has a direct link to the exhibition here. That was this first event in the Städte Freud producer gallery, was where we really put a number of publications on a table in a space where people were around them while we were still there. Within the reading room usually it was one or maybe two guests coming, talking a bit with us about themselves, their own practice, their interests, and then going on their own to be with the publications. And this is the first time that we got to see it more in a social space, and how we got to observe it as well, and how the book not only becomes something to sit and read on your own, but something to talk about with someone, an agent for a kind of an interaction.
Basically, this the color, the blue color that is seen also on the flyer and the walls here, came from a period of research that occurred actually for my own work as an artist. I've been researching a lot about architectural display or exhibition design from the early 30s, and I did a series of work on that, and looked at specific theories from the Bauhaus mostly, where basically at the Bells everything was already interdisciplinary, so you had lots of crossing over between typography within the architectural space, between the reading, between a book, which typography could reflect possibly in a carpet, or I mean it was already kind of extremely mixed. And I've been looking especially at Herbert Bayer, who was an exhibition designer who wrote a lot about the idea of an exhibition, about the fact that you can read an exhibition the way you could read a book. So by flipping over pages as a way you would enter a space, how do you start? How many directions of reading are actually possible within an exhibition space? And within this kind of general research, I found a series of sketches from students from the 30s. It was still in Dessau, I think for 32, sketches what is actually the ideal color for a reading room, and based on basically the optical abilities that each reader has, how long can you actually stay in a place without your eye being tired, a color that should enable the reader to grab information easily, and a color that should also fit with general functional aspects. So it shouldn't be too dark, it shouldn't be too bright either, but actually a color that, yeah, kind of embed what was at that time ideal conditions of reading, which also goes with a certain conditioning. And this was a blue which is actually far away from the kind of colors that were used in reading rooms in bourgeois housing, for instance, where the color was very often a dark red or a dark green, or even if we look at libraries, they were extremely dark and still dark. And I think the predominant color in libraries or reading rooms are very often brown, green, and burgundy red, I think.
Devising the concept for the show, the installation concept for the show, we decided to base it on, we've used since the beginning tags. Tagging and indexing is very important to us in the reading room project, and this was something we fixed on quite early while conceptualizing this show, and that we would base it upon, each of the books has tags, so we would base some kind of orientation on the tags, and we decided to then, the movement from this idea was to group them into 6 constellations, 6 axes: memory, registers, pop culture, spatial, physical. The tables themselves operate, there are six central tables, and these collect numbers of the books based on these 6 themes. The tables, however, cross over each other at multiple points, and the points at which the tables cross over each other, there are books which very clearly speak to 2 of those categories. What is interesting as soon as you start to categorize something according to very broad categories is that you're making decisions to leave some things in and some things out. These decisions need to be conclusive in order for you to physically place something. However, they always lead to dissatisfactions. I think there is probably very few of the books which you can clearly say speak only to one of the 6 categories. For practical reasons, we have to decide to put them in, but it becomes quite interesting, and it would automatically color people's perception of them. If they pick up a book and it's on a table entitled Memory, they would relate to it differently than if it had been placed, the same book had been placed on a table entitled The Spatial, for example. This is a very interesting way or aspect of trying to somehow curate the reading as much as curate the objects that are being exhibited. And the dynamics of reading and the dynamics of interaction are very important for us in the reading room. And without the reader, there would be really no publications. They would just be objects made of paper. So without the reader, and the reading room would not exist.
But I think one aspect that is also pretty strong with the table is this entering of a space, and when you enter a space such as Grand Union, or is it a gallery space, or is it even the space as Flutgraben, which was a production space, but also a space for diffusion. It's like, how do you actually encounter the space, and how can you encounter it with books? And I think the tables kind of create a certain choreography around. I mean, you cannot. It's a kind of pretty clear and direct confrontation. I mean, it's a pretty massive architectural installation, actually, and really takes lots of space. And I think that's a pretty important aspect, like how much does it actually manifest itself architecturally in the space, and how this could actually reflect upon the reading itself. of the book.
There's a kind of a labyrinth-like aspect to it, which somehow maybe reflects both the mass of material and the difficulty of fixing on something, fixing categories, fixing subjects, fixing what exactly these publications are about. Many of them are, in some aspects, thematically are quite elusive, or content-wise also are quite elusive, and I mean this is part of their dynamism.